feel like Kobe in the fourth quarter.
This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast coming at you Monday evening. It's September 25th. And for this episode, we're going to discuss Game 5 of the Wolves-Nuggets series from last postseason, the last game of that series that the Wolves lost to Denver in the first round. I thought this would be worthwhile as an activity to do in advance of training camp, kind of for two reasons. One, obviously, it's literally the last game the Wolves played, so I guess it's the most relevant film we have to go off of for this roster. And, rewatching the game, it's a pretty similar roster, so it kind of sticks. What we saw out there seems to portend what will be what this team will look like come game one of this season. But I think the second reason was the main reason I wanted to do this is just over the course of the summer, talking to Wolves fans or talking to people within the Wolves organization, I felt like I heard so many people reference Game 5. Like, I think we maybe found something in Game 5 or the second half of Game 5. Things looked pretty good. I think it's this element of encouragement that people are holding on to going into this season ahead. And I don't know, I guess I kind of wanted to fact check that for my own brain or weigh out what was good, what was maybe ignored in some ways in the name of coping. So I have Jack Borman here from canishoopus.com. Jack, you were also willing to rewatch Game 5 with me. I hope it was a worthwhile activity for you too. I sent you this in the email, but kind of what I was just saying there, I'm curious your thoughts on that whole sort of narrative that kind of developed this summer where people were kind of saying, I think they found something in Game 5. What specifically do you think that is about? What were people referencing? And then having rewatched this game, how much of that does check out to you? And we can pick into the details, but where do you think that narrative kind of generated from?
Well, first of all, I think that it kind of came from the fact that the biggest criticism of the, Ant, Cat, Gobert trio is that whether people wanted to, place the onus on Chris Finch or on Gobert or the point guard or whomever, that the team struggled to kind of get all three of them going at the same time in moments that it mattered. And I think that in the second half of Game 5, we saw how all three of them can find success offensively while they're on the floor at the same time.
Sure.
And I think that's probably where that narrative came from the most. I would honestly say that they played better in the first half of that game than the second half of that game, just because I thought that the defense that they played in the first half was really eye-opening in the way that they got the Nuggets to play in one-on-one situations so much. And we know that the Nuggets are at their most dangerous like they were in the fourth quarter and parts of the third quarter too, when they kind of got back into it a little bit when, they're just making really quick decisions with the ball. You don't see guys holding the ball for too long, not doing something productive. You might see Murray hold the ball for 5, 6, 8 seconds, whatever it is, because he's toying with the defense. He's kind of waiting for Jokic to set a screen or get into a DHO or something like that. But I thought the Wolves defense was what was most encouraging. But in terms of where that narrative is coming from, I think it's certainly that we saw those three guys, all play together pretty well offensively in that second half. And they all had their moments. I think Rudy had 3 or 4 lob dunks and had some really good takes in transition and some good ISO plays. And then Cat was just really quick with catching and going and had 3 or 4 and ones in that second half alone. And was just really under control and playing within himself. So I think that that's probably what the I guess fan narrative had people most excited about.
Yeah, I'm with that too, and I kind of had that in my mind going into it, that it was the big three all in tandem, kind of working together. And I think in the second half box score, you see that, like you said, Cat started contributing offensively after struggling in the first half. And I think Rudy was 3 for 3 in the second half himself. I think what I noticed rewatching it, what made it be so that all three could get going was kind of two things. I think it started with Cat, right away at the beginning of the third quarter. He started finally being able to take his guy off the dribble. And that was a couple of those and ones. He just kind of put his head down, got through there, was getting to the basket, and that gave the Wolves a second offensive option. It was just pretty much all Ant, right? In the first quarter, Ant was so heavy usage, head down, locked in, going. And Cat presented another option in tandem to Ant. Then what got Rudy going, I thought, was in the fourth quarter, they were putting two on Ant every time. Like, they were like, okay, Cat and Ant are the two things. Ant is the primary threat. They put two on the ball every time, which left Rudy to do is kind of like slowly roll to the middle of the floor, down to the baseline, and they were swing, finding Rudy, easy dunks there. So I think the reason all three of them got going was because Cat picked it up in the second half, and then because of Denver's defense really prioritizing Ant, left Rudy open to contribute particularly in the fourth quarter of that game. So that is, to me, an indicator that they all absolutely can go in the same game. They did. They all did in the second half of that game. I thought a little bit of it was circumstantial. I don't know specific to that game if Ant wasn't playing out of his mind. If you ever get to that Rudy part, right? If they don't ever need to start doubling Ant, I don't know how open Rudy gets, and then we don't get that third leg of the narrative there. I know that's kind of like picking into it. I didn't remember that before watching, but even just rewatching like the broadcast, Mike Malone is getting interviewed. He goes like in the between third quarter and fourth quarter thing. He's like, "Yeah, we're gonna start putting two on Ant." He just like says it to the person. Then sure enough, like first possession, Cat sets a screen, Jokic comes up and doubles, or and they play off of it there. So obviously that's gonna be a theme all year, right? With Ant is how do you get yours, and then how do you react to when defenses are trying to take him away? Because I think we know Ant's going to be more aggressive, maybe something close to this game. That also really stood out to me. Like, man, it went through Ant. It was a lot of Ant usage. Is that fair to assume that's what like week one looks like? Do we think Ant's usage is going to be this level of high?
I'm not sure, frankly.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why I say that is because I think important context here is that Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert would both freely admit that they were neither one of them was anywhere near 100% for
Sure.
Game 5. Karl-Anthony Towns, you know, said in the locker room, on and off camera that his burst just wasn't the same, and how could it be after
Totally.
missing 52 games with a calf strain, and that's what was so encouraging about those drives that he had. That wasn't 100%, the burst wasn't there, but he was still able to figure out ways to get around him. But
Yeah, he kind of full backed his way through Aaron Gordon more in this game, right? More than like,
yeah, and he
yeah.
really got at his hip and created contact by just
Yep.
stepping quickly to his hip and
Mhm.
force, and that was how he drew fouls.
Yeah.
But back to your original question with Ant, the reason why I don't know that he will be is that I think that with Karl and with Rudy, I think those guys are really diplomatic in saying, I would be surprised if those guys on media day here don't say, yeah, like Ant is the guy and we've got to get him the ball. But then when the game time comes and the competitor in both of them is out more, that they don't start getting a little frustrated that they aren't getting the ball. Um, Now, I think that getting Ant the ball opens up a scenario that we saw in Game 5, which is that if you can activate Ant and force the defense to prioritize him, that it'll make life easier for Karl and Rudy. So I think if you're approaching this and you're Chris Finch, I think kind of it's almost like an order of operations in math, right? Where I think Ant has to be the first thing that you're doing, just because if you can get him going, it opens up the most amount of options for your offense. So in that regard, I think they'll go to him first, and I think they'll look to him to be the first option. But I don't think that we'll see 10 shot attempts in the first quarter like we did in Game 5. Um, but then again, Ant doing that was what really opened things up in the fourth quarter. We got into some of that V action that you've referenced earlier in the season, where Ant is at the top of the key with Rudy, and he'll throw the ball to the wing, and then Rudy will roll and get that lob. That's what we saw. We saw Mike do that a couple of times in that game. We saw Nod do it, and Slow-Mo was out in this game.
Yeah.
But those Rudy screens I had written down in my notes here while you were talking is that in the first half, almost all of Ant's buckets came off of a Rudy Gobert screen.
They're
And then
they're playing on
in
the
the
screen right now for those who are watching on YouTube. I just kind of wanted to play this, even if just in the background, to show how head down Ant is. I mean, just look at this one right here. Like, look at Conley over there. He's like, nope, I'm. It was just
and he
takeover.
got to that little mid floater
He
game
did.
too, which I think
Mm-hmm.
was encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's something that he's gotten better at. I had written down in my notes that he changed speeds really well.
Yeah.
That he was aggressive, but he did a good job of doing stuff like that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a mix of how
Mm-hmm.
he's approaching and attacking. Um,
I feel like
and
we saw that with Team USA too, right? Like a little
yeah,
bit more of that in between downhill handle, changing pace, changing direction. I think that's a developing part of his game.
and that was the biggest thing I think that we took away from his exit interview after that Memphis series.
Mm-hmm.
Was that he was like, I got to get better in the mid range, and Finch said he's got to get better in the mid range because with his speed and his shooting from deep, like that's just what's going to unlock everything. And you look at all the Booker is kind of a pretty
Yeah.
comparable guy in terms of he was just a really talented scorer that really refined and rounded
Mm-hmm.
out some edges of his game and became this super complete player. And a lot of that stemmed from his footwork in the mid range and the way he was able to
Mm-hmm.
just completely um, dictate what a defense has to do in guarding him by what he did in the mid range. And I think for Ant, that's the next step. And he certainly did a lot of that in this game. And again, it goes to the whole point of why you got to get Ant involved in the game first, I think, because everything is gonna flow down from there. And we saw that in game 5.
We did. We did. I think it started with Ant. It eventually got to Cat and Rudy. I think it. You kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier. This is just like we should note that this fact that this team was completely thin in this game, right? I'm watching the game, and the first person to check in is Torian Prince. Second person to check in is Jalen Noel. Third person to check in is Austin Rivers, and that's it. That's the 8 that they played with. That's 3 guys
And
who aren't
and
on the
Noel
team this
played
year.
8 minutes. Austin Rivers played 14.
Yeah. So they did not have support outside of that starting group. Maybe that's part of the reason why it felt like we were a little more honed in on Cat, Rudy, Ant, the triumvirate, kind of coming together in this game. Maybe as we get to the regular season, things are going to be a little bit more broken up, staggered, whatever. And I say that to mean like I don't think the only way this team can win is if all 3 of them play like they did in the second half of game 5 together. Like that's not going to happen every single night. So how do you get it? So maybe just 2 of them are having a game. Like they need to be able to have a good team game, be able to compete at a high level against just about any team in the league. If you can only get to 2 of those guys in a major way throughout the game, obviously maybe Jaden has a bigger game or Conley shoots 16 shots in a game. It doesn't need to be this, right? Like it happened in this game because they were so thin in terms of depth. And because it was the playoffs and these guys are all playing like 40 minutes in this game. So I think game 5 was encouraging in that all 3 of them played well. It doesn't need to be the blueprint of how this team has success this season.
Yeah, I don't think it does either. I think one of my, I guess, takes coming into this season is that like I think there is as much pressure on Chris Finch
Yeah.
as there is on any coach in the league. And what I mean by that isn't that he's on the hot seat, or I'm saying people should be calling for his job if things don't go well right away. That's not at all what I'm saying. So I want to put that disclaimer out there right now. What I'm saying is that there are so many different ways that the Timberwolves can go this season in terms of, like you were saying, the staggering and the pairings that they can get to. Are there certain trios that you want to try to look at? You can play a different style of basketball. You can go small. You can go huge. You can get a bunch of shooters on the floor. You can get a lineup in there that can completely just muck up the game and make it a slow slog and really emphasize half court defense. And that the coaching staff just has so many levers that they can pull, and that it really is going to be on Finch, whether he's the one building the rotation or talking to his, his offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator about, hey, these are the things that I want to get to in this matchup, that sort of thing. Just because unlike what we saw in game 5, you can make a real argument that the Timberwolves have the deepest roster
Yeah.
in the league. And I don't think that, I'm not sitting here saying that with, all due respect to Travion Graham, but with like, you don't have those types of players like Jalen Noel and Austin Rivers. Both are still unrestricted free agents, and we're the 7th and 8th man in a playoff game on the road, closeout game in which the Timberwolves took the eventual champions down to the wire without 3 of their 6 most impactful players, right? Or 7 most impactful players. Like I think that element of it just highlights exactly what you're saying, that I don't think the blueprint needs to be Ant, Cat, Gobert. I think it would be awesome if that was the blueprint that helped them, win playoff games and really high leverage games. Just because obviously you want your best players to play well on the biggest stages. But I think the biggest thing for this Timberwolves team is going to be not, hyper focusing on trying to get those 3 players going all the time. It's going to be finding the little duos and trios within a game that you can try to work to. And if, hey, our option A isn't working, okay, cool, we've got this option B of, the Cat and Nas duo that we can try to get to, or we can try to get some, slow-mo and Gobert minutes going, if we feel like we need some stronger interior defense. Like, there's just, like I said, so many levers you can pull.
No, but
And
it's a puzzle. That's what I've been putting it.
yeah,
Like,
and it's just going to be about timing and when you pull them and what teams you're pulling them against, and that sort of thing. So is it a problem? Sure, but I guess it's a good problem to have the opportunity to solve.
Sure.
If you're a Timberwolves fan.
Jack, I'm just gonna grab our first break here, but I want to keep going on this. Just want to remind people that October 14th, we will be at Falling Knife Brewing Company doing Wolves Fest. We're just calling it like a Wolves Brewery Day. Like, everybody come out, wear Wolves gear. We'll hang out an extended period of time on Saturday. Come at like 4 if you want. We'll do the show at like 5. The Wolves play at 6:30 that night. It's their first, I guess, stateside preseason game. They play the Knicks. So we're just hoping before the season gets crazy that this is a time that we can kind of get a bunch of Wolves fans together to talk about the Wolves, hang out, and watch the first preseason game. As you see some of these clips from last year when we're at Falling Knife, we're looking forward to getting everyone together again to do that again. Wolves Fest 23, Falling Knife is calling it. You can come about 4:00. We'll do the pod, me and Britt, at about 5:00, and then the Wolves Knicks game starts at 6:30. So keep that on your calendar for October 14th. All right, Jack. Let's keep going along. You were kind of mentioning some of the duos, and I found myself really focusing in on Cat in this game in general, and why was the first half so bad? Because the first half was as bad as the second half was good. What are the things that opened it up? Who are the players that he was playing with? I didn't really find a great answer to that, other than I feel like it just took him the first half to get comfortable, maybe kind of settle the nerves down a little bit, and just see the ball kind of more consistently go through the basket. The first 2 or 3 drives of the game were sloppy and kind of discombobulated. And then it really turned on a dime for the second half, where he was just a force and a problem there. The only thing I wrote down was maybe more empty corner space to attack in the second quarter. Or the second half. I think in general with Cat, that's going to be the main thing for getting him going offensively this season, is just finding space for him to create with that kind of loping dribble drive that he has to his game, that is both takes up a lot of space, but is really, developing into becoming his kind of main thing offensively. What did you just take away from Cat's performance in Game 5 and kind of the juxtaposition of those 2 halves that he had?
Yeah, I think the personnel that he was on the floor with in the first half is something that really I don't think you can not mention here. So Ant really had it rolling right away in the first quarter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Cat in a sort of a sense just kind of got out of the way, and I think really was just trying to not be the one that was preventing Ant from getting going. I think when Cat had more opportunity, I guess, or took more of the possessions as a scorer in the second quarter. And the lineups that he was out there with in the first 3-4 minutes of the second quarter, he was playing with Mike Conley, Austin Rivers, Jalen Noel, Torian Prince, and Nikhil. So Jalen Noel was in there for the first minute, and then Nikhil. So the 5-man lineup was really Mike, Austin, Nikhil, Torian, and Cat.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing there is, like, Karl is unquestionably like the go-to guy there. They just kept going
Yeah.
to the left block, trying to get these left block post ups, and Karl was getting into it really slow, wasn't decisive, and no one was really moving around to try to help him all that much. And I think that, you know, Karl, you see here, is just way more decisive. He's just deciding
Yeah,
he's
this is
going
the
to go
second
with
half.
it.
Yeah.
And he saw a lot more single coverage too when he was playing out there alongside Ant, whereas he was seeing double teams,
Mm-hmm.
and people were just swarming him in the paint and got the ball knocked away from him whenever he kind of had it low, trying to make his drive from guys that were, chipping in from above the break. And I think for Karl, it's just like, how can you find ways to get him single covered in the post? And I think we've seen him find success the most when he's in those positions as a post-up player, because I think he goes quicker. There's times when he's expecting that double team to come, whether it's from the low side or the high side. That's when things kind of slow down for him, and he wants to try to be methodical and pick the defense apart, when in reality he's just making it tougher on himself. So I think the for Karl, it's how can you get him in positions to make the quickest decisions. And I think that's when you've got other playmakers out there where people got to think about Ant. They've got to think about Jaden off the bounce. They've got to think about someone like Nas. And
Mm-hmm.
the great thing about Karl that I don't think people necessarily talk about enough is he's like a really willing passer. Like
For
when he
sure.
played with Nas down the stretch of the regular season before Nas got hurt, he was like, "Oh, Nas and a guy that's even remotely smaller than him, like I'm dumping it in there." And he
Mm-hmm.
wanted Nas to just go to work. And so I think that's going to be the thing for Karl, is try to pair him, position him with guys that can really score the ball offensively. And instead of trying to like help him defensively, I think with Karl, you just go all in on offense as best you can and just try to empower those lineups to score. Um, so
I'm with you. I'm with you on that. I think the decisiveness stands out, right? Because that is the quicker he goes all the time is going to be before the spacing gets bad, right? Any sort of delay is going to bring that, whether if he's on the block, it's going to bring that doubler from the baseline to come over to him. Or even if it's just like on the swing, he's on the opposite side, like decisively going, not necessarily reading the floor all out before he goes, because in whatever time it takes him to read the floor, the floor is going to kind of fill up. And I think that's Karl's got the hardest job, right? That's also kind of become a narrative, but I think that's true in this sense too, where we need Karl to be super decisive, right? For him to get his offense. Well, for him to be that passer that he can be and is underrated at, you need to be able to read the floor to be able to figure out when and where to go. So it's kind of one of those like imperfect balances to find, and I think another one of those things that's going to take time. I just want to play this clip right here. This is like a good Cat find of Rudy and Patient, where Rudy drops down right there, but Cat's kind of got his eye on Rudy here the whole time, right? And Rudy's setting the screen, no one's finding him, but Cat is looking for Rudy the entire time here, draws the second defender, that's a dime.
that was the best one of the best passes of his career, I think.
And it was 9 minutes left in the fourth quarter, when it was the time in which the defense was leaving Rudy kind of open on that backside there. That's what we're talking about, is they're playing up because Ant's on the perimeter, Cat's on the perimeter. They're leaving Rudy back there. And I think Cat has a good like inherent feel for that. That probably has to do with having been on the receiving side of a lot of passes in the dunker spot or around the rim as a 7-footer himself. He feels that really well. But, we think back to the regular season too, and it was like, okay, he was the best at finding Rudy, hands down.
Before he got injured or after?
Yeah. Before he got injured, like the first whatever what was that first 24 games or something. Like he was good at finding, or probably the best at finding Rudy on the team at the beginning of the season. But it kind of came at the cost of some of his offensive game. You know, there's the acclimation period and all that. But I think at the end of the day, while his processing time was slow, he couldn't be decisive. The easier option there was to find Rudy. I don't think if he can become super decisive and hold on to that passing ability, specifically a passing ability that's going to get Rudy going, that's where he opens up the puzzle, right? For the defense.
Yeah.
Now they need to be answering it. They don't need to just be doubling Cat. If it's doubling Cat and he can pick that apart, teams are going to have trouble defending this team. It's just how quick can Cat do that, and how solid can the spacing become? Because a lot of the good spacing in this game specifically was purely a product of Ant getting doubled, right? Or them putting two guys out on Ant. So he needs to be super in tune to that. Like, this is a huge film year, I think, for Cat. In like seeing the first 5 games. All right, what did we miss here? What can I do better? This is the learning process is for him there, and I think a lot rides on his ability to do that.
Yeah, and I was going to mention that, the reason I asked you before or after the trade was because, I think when you miss that much time and you feel that helpless as a player, not being out there, being able to help your guys and, and just be in the thick of it is you kind of got to take a step back and you watch it with a different set of eyes. And like, and Karl talked about how, there were some games where he sat back in the locker room and watched the game with Tim Connolly, and they just talked about the game and what he can do and where he needs to fit in and that type of thing. Cause Tim Connolly is one of these guys that started as a scout, is a very, knowledgeable basketball mind. He's not somebody that was more of a, an analytics based guy who, maybe it doesn't have the same, just I'm going to dive into the film and just love that type of the game. And I think with Karl, you think of how are the ways that Kyle Anderson is helping to get Rudy Gobert involved. You talk to Mike Conley even after Mike gets there, and you say like, hey, like, we learned from Mike the thing where you want to bounce it and have Rudy receive it as the ball is going up was something that he talked about a lot. It's those little intricacies, because you think about it too, of like, who are the pairings that were best with Rudy? It was Mike, and then Nikhil was really great with Rudy too. And I think that having those two guys as resources, and Dell Demps too. Like Dell Demps is part of the Wolves front office, was an assistant coach in Utah when Rudy was there, and being able to talk to all these guys and Rudy himself too about like, hey man, where do you like the ball? Like, what are some ways that you manipulated the defense, or that your teammates manipulated the defense with their eyes in Utah? And granted, in Utah, everything was much more spread out. But even if you go back to that clip, like that's a spread look where you've got 4 guys on the perimeter, and Karl, looks off a guy in the corner and fakes that pass, full well knowing that there you go. It's a spread pick and roll. Karl's out there. You got 4 guys on the perimeter. And then Karl's going to fake a pass here to the corner to TP, and TP's probably made at this point 3 or 4 catch and shoot threes, or it's Nikhil over there, and boom, just looks him off and then throws it right there. I think that you're going to see more of that. I think the more that you can get Karl on the perimeter in positions to pass it, where he's got the position, the 3 decisions of, do I want to shoot it, do I want to drive it, or do I want to pass it? I think is the best way you're going to activate Karl as a 4, at least when Rudy's out there.
You know what else I wrote down about that play is Karl's, like before Karl makes that pass, it's kind of like the third action of it. I guess I can put it up here again. But the first one is this double screen, right? That's action number 1. You get here to Prince in the corner. It's a pick and roll action with Rudy. That's action number 2. And then action number 3 is kind of Karl reading it, getting the screen, slip out of there from Prince, and finding it. That makes, if you want to get to the third action, it's really important that your first action starts so early, right? And
when their offense sputtered in this game, they waited until there was 10 or 11 seconds on the shot clock to do anything. And that's probably the biggest downfall of Ant right now, I think, is that when Ant kind of makes his mind up of, I want to go, or I want to, dance a little bit on the perimeter.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in the fourth quarter, you saw some of that when Denver started to build their lead.
Jack, let's move on to a little bit more of the niche things from this game. I know you texted me, how many minutes do I have to talk about? Do I get to talk about Nikhil Alexander-Walker on this podcast? I said, well, maybe in the second half, but rewatching it myself.
No, that's not what you said. You said, and I quote, "Nah limit." Spending way too much time with Kyle.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I did say that. Rewatching the game, I mean, it's funny because Jamal Murray goes off in this game, right? And Nikhil's guarding him. So I was like, I just kind of like pulled up the box score before I watched it, and I'm like, oh wow, I forgot Jamal Murray was the problem in this game. But man, I don't feel it was just crazy shot making by Jamal largely. It would have been nice if you could have mixed Jaden in there a little bit. I think that maybe changes it a little bit. But even with Jamal Murray going off while guarded by Nikhil, I just thought all the small things on the offensive side of the floor of being your just classic fifth option 3-and-D guy, it was just good to watch it over again and to be like, this guy fits here, particularly in this offense that is as high use. Like the main guys are going to be really as high usage as they possibly can be in this game. And to that end, I felt like Nikhil fit in really well. Actually ended the game taking 9 threes, but you just didn't really feel the weight of his usage. It was just kind of there at the right times. I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's hard to not be getting pretty excited about Nikhil, given what he did not only in this game 5, not that whole series, the play-in games after Jaden got hurt, what's happened, the role he played for Canada and how good he looked in that. I mean, it just looks like this team has, I don't want to say stumbled into, but found through that trade a legitimate bench piece. It really seems to be that way, and I don't leave rewatching that game thinking we overrated it at all. I'm just like, at least in what we've seen, the like 7 games Nikhil played in post Jaden injury, it's hard not to give Nikhil a great grade from that, and then to notice growth from Canada. I think everyone's pretty high on him going into training camp here.
Yeah, and the first thing I want to do is give Chris Finch a lot of credit. Because Tim Connolly sat in front of all of us on the media call after the trade deadline and said that Finchy pounded the table pretty hard for Nikhil Alexander-Walker. And the Timberwolves had 2 choices. They could have had Rudy Gay or Nikhil Alexander-Walker. Both of those guys are making a very similar contract number, and one of the two needed to be added for salary filler purposes to make that deal work. And the fact that Finch coached him Nikhil's rookie year in New Orleans, in the fact that Finch kind of remembered his game and knew what he liked and felt that he could fit, and also had the familiarity with Gobert. Like Finchy deserves a lot of credit for that. But with Nikhil specifically, the biggest thing that I wrote down about Nikhil in this game was that he's not like role players that the Timberwolves have had the last handful of years, where I think that the Wolves have been hamstrung by the fact that so many of their role players have been one-way players. You think about guys like a young Naz Reid or Jalen Noel, those guys. Yeah, for sure. Like, I frankly have done a pretty good job of removing some of those Timberwolves teams from my mind. So I'm not going to sit here and try to recall.
You're the one who referenced Trevion Graham already in this episode. So.
Yeah, that was just like,
that was more of a zero.
You've got one that you need to get rid of that you just have in the pocket that you're holding on to. That was mine. But yeah, like Nikhil is a total 2-way fit with what this Wolves team does, and he does all the little things. And there's a point in the fourth quarter where the Nuggets are really starting to gain momentum. And Nikhil draws an illegal screen when the crowd is really starting to get into it, and then
Jokic.
Comes right back down and drains a just really confident, steps into a 3 when it feels like the game is kind of about to get off the rails, and I think gets the Wolves back to either within 1 or 2 points. And that's what kind of, I think TP hits a 3 after that and really kind of keeps the Timberwolves holding on to the rope, which is really important. And I think The great thing about Nikhil is that he fits with, either, we've talked a lot about the two different constructs, the Gobert side and the Town side. And I think he fits really well with both because he's a really smart playmaker in that he doesn't really ever try to do too much. I don't think, sure, he'll take some ill-advised threes at times, but, I think that a lot of the decisions that he made in terms of when to drive were just really smart when you could kind of sense like, hey, Carl's kind of struggling here, or I don't want Ant, Ant shouldn't have to take every single shot, or hey, let's try to get Rudy a look, and he gets to a certain point on the floor where he knows he's going to be able to throw a lob up to Rudy or dump it off to Rudy, and I think two of the times that Gobert gets fouled, it's because Na drives to a certain point on the floor that he knows he'll be able to get the ball to Gobert, and it's just like all those little things that really stood out. And I think you said that having Jaden would have helped on Jamal Murray. Um, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm going to push back a little bit and say that, like, I don't know what else Jaden could have done that
Yeah,
Nikhil didn't do.
just
I
being
think
like
Jaden obviously
longer. I don't. I mean, it was just so many
maybe
like.
a block a shot or two. Like,
Yeah.
it's just, and it's such a credit to Nikhil that
Yeah,
if you go and look at his screen navigation, we really saw it too in that play-in game against SGA. Like the
yeah.
way that he's able to, and they're setting a bajillion screens a game for both those players,
Hmm.
and you've got to get over Jokic constantly in the DHO and in the pick and roll game.
Right.
You think about how many guys in the Wolves previously would just foul guys and wouldn't be able to get in between the ball and the big, but he does that consistently. Was flying around and so many of these tough shots. I think Jamal probably had 3 or 4 shots that were just wide open, that were miscommunications on DHOs or pick and rolls, but he is right there on so many shots
Yeah.
where you're just like, how the hell is he getting that shot off to begin with, and then how does it go in? Um, so I think the two biggest things for me with Nikhil are really just, I think the screen navigation is just incredible. For a guy his size at 6'5", it's tough, and then just his kind of sense of when to drive and try to score to relieve some pressure off of everyone else when the defense is really paying attention to other guys, or what really stand out to me about him.
I'm kind of with you in the maybe it was just like playoff Murray or whatever, and there was just no answer for it in that game. Maybe like that is a really heavy duty job in terms of energy to when you're
He did
guarding.
do it for 38 minutes.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. So there might have just been in that game some value in having been able to take a break a couple times.
For sure.
You
Yeah,
know?
for sure.
And I say that to talk about this season, and it gets me really excited about what this team can do from a point of attack defense standpoint, because there's plenty of games last year during the regular season with Jaden where he had to guard the Luka or the SGA the entire game, right? And or maybe like Ant would step in sometimes. It's the end of the quarter. Ant
When
slaps
Ant
the
wants
floor.
to,
Yeah,
when
yeah,
Ant's
yeah.
like, "Hey, I got this. Let me cook." Like
Exactly.
he's good at it. It's
Yeah.
just
So Ant, maybe a little bit more of that Ant in the mix, but also having Nikhil there, like being able to diversify who you can put on the Jamal Murrays, Luka Doncic, Dame Lillard's, whatever. I think this team can feel a lot of value in that, just from taking some of the miles off of what Jaden had to do, maybe taking some of the fouls off of what Jaden had to do because he was in that role. And then, like, kind of the great intrigue with Jaden, too, right, is what could he be as lurking off the corner, getting in there, poke steals, block shots at the rim. The more you can put Ant on ball or Nikhil on ball and not lose that much between where they are and what Jaden was doing, you make up for value in Jaden being a second rim protector next to Rudy Gobert,
and not being in foul trouble.
and not being in foul trouble. It's there's all this like with Jaden's a funny one to talk about for this season, right? He's in the age curve to grow and take the next step and leap and all those sort of things. Yet there's just really there's not much more room in terms of usage for him, right? His usage was a career high last year, I'm assuming, and that was in large part due to the fact that Cat missed 52 games. And so how do you squeeze out every drop of Jaden without, adjusting for giving him the ball more often or giving him more opportunity, because that's just probably not going to happen given what the rest of the roster is. And I think it's these things on the margins. It's like, how do we take him out of foul trouble more often, off the ball a little bit more? Can we put him in position out on the whenever he's out there where, sometimes, and I think this was when like Ant was hurt, it felt like a lot of Jaden isolation. Like, you want to give him more, but you want to give it to him in those bent floor situations. You've reversed it to him. Like, where are the levels on the margins that Jaden can improve, or that you can give Jaden more? Because I just don't know how you're able to give him a bigger slice of the pie of the offense, because there's just not going to be as much pie available this season.
I was going to say, I'm hoping you're not looking to me to give you a concrete answer there, because my answer was going to be, truthfully, I have no idea. And I think, again, it all comes down to, I think it's honestly like, if you just have a kitchen and you have your countertops just completely full with ingredients, and you're just going to make this, this soup or this stew that you can just throw a bunch of shit into the pot and kind of be like, oh, this would pair well with this, or this would do well with that.
Right.
And it's just an endless combination of what you want to do, because I think it's going to be, so much of it is going to be matchup based. I don't think the Timberwolves should, be really set in their ways of rotations, because I just think it should be all like game plan driven, and that hopefully this year, knock on wood, like we don't have a situation like Cat was really sick last year during training camp. Gobert was hurt coming over from Eurobasket. Like, there's all of these things that that just made last season more difficult, that I hope that they don't have this time around, with where training camp can be a real like experimentation period of trying all these sorts of things, so that when you need to go to something, or you need to, let's say Ant's struggling and Cat has an off shooting night, where Jaden can be a guy that you step up, and based on, hey, we've tried this in training camp, we've tried this in practice, we know that, maybe it's Mike does a really good job of playing in this empty pick and roll with Gobert, and Jaden's in the opposite corner, and Mike's just this savvy vet who has a really good understanding of knowing kind of when
How
to
to
look off a
target that.
defense to get run the baseline and get Jaden in the corner. Because Jaden, when he was at his best last season, was when he was able to attack out of the corner, particularly against a smaller guy. Like, honestly, like you would have Mike Conley as a chaser. That is how a lot of these modern NBA defenses work. And a lot of those chasers guarded Jaden McDaniels. And we saw that in that Hawks game where he just obliterated Trae Young. He went at him like 3 or 4 times. And it's those types of things. It's how can you maximize him, is probably maximizing his efficiency. And it's looking, hey, where are the moments last season where he was able to really feel really confident in what he was doing and get to his spots and score pretty repetitively. And I think it's those types of things. And it's, again, like, it's something that I'll steal something from Cheryl Reeve on the Lynx side, is that the last couple of years they've had so many players in and out with injuries, and they've had to deal with so many different lineup combinations, and in these combinations where they haven't had a chance to practice very much. And the things that they're preaching are, hey, the first thing we can do is what players do we have available, and where are they most comfortable? Where do they like to shoot from the most? Are there certain areas of the floor they like to attack? And then how can we create schemes or plays that get players the ball where they're the most comfortable? And I think for Jaden, that's what it's going to be all about. Like, I don't think you're looking for Jaden to set the world on fire as an isolation player offensively. Like, just catch and shoot threes, be cut at the right times, because I think that's another area that he can just really take control of the game, is as a cutter. And then those corner attacks off the dribble. Do you need Jaden to do a whole lot else? Maybe
No, but don't you feel like people are like saying that it's like, oh, like what more, like Jaden's got more in his bag.
They're
like,
saying it, but I'm just saying, like, functionally.
No, I agree with you.
What more does he need to do offensively? I just think he needs to be really good at those 3 things. And you wonder, I mean, the other variable in this is, like, this is a business, right? Like, guys want to get theirs, and Jaden McDaniels is in a contract year. Like, he's not going to sign an extension before the season starts. Am I wrong? Like,
I don't know.
At this point, it's like likely that he probably won't, or we can. operating under the assumption that he waits or that his representation in the Timberwolves don't meet again until next year to really hammer this thing out. Like, that's another thing too, is, maybe like, I don't know. That's just it's another variable is how
it's
I'd
a
put it.
reason to if they don't sign him to an extension before October 30th or whatever the deadline is for that. I guess it would probably be before the season starts. Sometime in the next few weeks would be the deadline of that before needing to roll it over to next summer. Like, yeah, you do want to give Jaden a role that he likes, so he's willing to re-sign with your team, and it'll be restricted free agency, and I think he'll be back. Like, I would be. Hopefully, it doesn't need to get to like the DeAndre Ayton situation of a couple years ago, where he has to go sign a offer sheet somewhere else, and then
Bill
the Wolves
Duffy
have to
got that same dare with DeAndre Ayton.
He did.
I think
Same
if you
agent.
dare Bill Duffy again, he'll go find a max. So
Yeah, and that's just the whole interesting conundrum of the Jaden situation is how to evaluate him, right? Because yeah, he's probably gonna have a similar usage role this year. So if you're another team out there, you've never actually seen Jaden be the number 2 guy on a team. Like if you're Charlotte or whatever, and you're like, oh, we're gonna unload a max offer for this guy. Like you've actually never seen him be the 1B to anyone. And he won't have
it's
that
like
opportunity.
scary how much of a proof of concept Mikal Bridges is, where he is just like this terrifyingly good on-ball defender who is just who I think like Mikal was more advanced offensively in that he was more consistent, more efficient off the ball as this kind of like I'm saying, catch and shoot threes, attack every once in a while off the dribble type of player. And got this, a comparable contract, and then just became this offensive star at just doing what he's really good at and not trying to
once
do
he moved
anything crazy.
somewhere else,
Once he moved somewhere else. So that's what I'm saying is like you're not going to be able to do it in Phoenix or in Minnesota. So if you're another team, like there's that. But again, it comes down to just like, how do you do it here, or what more can you ask of him? And again, maybe it's like you feel good about Jaden being able to give you 20, so you rest Ant or you rest Cat or whatever. But like with the team fully constituted, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it would come in second unit splits. Like, is he going to get minutes at the 4? Like, is that a way to get him more of an opportunity in those groupings, or when it's just is he out there when it's just Rudy, no Cat lineups a lot? Like that would be a place that roster lineup configuration you could do that could get him more. I don't know. I think at the same time he probably doesn't need to show a ton more offensively or more usage to still get close to a max contract or these $25-30 million numbers that we're throwing out there, because I think there is a belief in the proof of concept, even though we haven't really seen that play out a ton. I guess that's just like word of mouth. But I think you and I both believe in it, right? Like if he goes and moves somewhere like Mikal Bridges did, I think he would have a similar ascension in that sort of way. And to be clear, the reason Mikal Bridges left was because he got traded for Kevin Durant. Like this isn't me or you suggesting like, oh, they just got to let him go. Roster's too expensive.
It's more me saying that I think that another team would be willing to offer him a max contract because you can look at what Mikal Bridges did, and it's a similar player, and talk yourself into, hey, if I'm Charlotte or I'm Oklahoma City or or San Antonio, even like a team with a ton of cap space, like, hey, I'd do this.
Jack, I want to talk about one more thing with Cat and Gobert, but I am going to do one more ad read here. We're gonna show Prize Picks on the screen here on the YouTube channel, just so people, if you haven't tried this before, Prize Picks is a sponsor of the show, and they will match a $100 sign-up bonus if you go to prizepicks.com and use the promo code Dane. But just to quickly show you how this works, all right? So me and Jack are recording this 26 minutes before the Rams and Bengals play each other, so we can select Joe Burrow here for more or less than 239.5 passing yards. Let's say Burrow figures it out. We'll give him a more than there. Let's get receiving yards. Puka Nacua. Jack, I got to take my fantasy guy for more than 71.5 receiving yards here. We'll say Jamar Chase, 79.5 is less than that number. And I don't know why Tyler Higbee's at 30.5. We'll go less than that there too. So you see here is we have 4 players. We have Burrow, Nakua, Chase, and Higbee, all for more or less than their yardage total. If all 4 of those hit, this is you would get 10-1 on that's a power play for those 4 picks, or you can choose a flex play where if you only get 3 of the 4 correct, you get 1.25 your money, or 5 times if you get all 4 correct. So I just wanted to show this on the screen. I mean, we've talked about prize picks a ton, but this is how the game works. They have yardage totals set or touchdown total set for all the players, or for basketball once we get their points, assists, rebounds, whatever it might be. You just choose your more or less thans and hit those all together for what they call a power play or a flex play. So again, that's prizepicks.com. If you want to try out Prize Picks, they will throw you a $100 sign-up bonus if you use the promo code Dane, and let them know you came from us, because that helps us, let them know that we are getting our listeners to try out their product. So prizepicks.com, Prize Picks app, promo code Dane. Jack, last thing, relatively quickly here, and I wanted to put it at the end because I don't think it's super relevant for the beginning of the season. But, man, when I'm watching that game, defensively what I'm looking at the whole time is the decision to have Cat guard Jokic and Gobert be in that kind of lurking spot. I really went into that series thinking the best move was just have Rudy on Jokic, have him do his thing and invest your other resources outside of it. Like, we're putting our best defender on Jokic and the other 4 are staying home on shooters. The Cat thing worked way better. I was wrong there. Cat did a really good job on Jokic, and I mean, I had that logged in my brain, but I think that particularly stood out maybe in that game 5 there. And it makes some sense. If Cat can kind of square Jokic up, be that first line of defense, then Gobert lurking at the rim is really going to deter Jokic's ability to get anything going off the dribble towards the rim. And it did in that game. I think this is still a really relevant thing and a noteworthy thing that we should remember when it becomes playoff time. Like game 1 of the season when they're playing Toronto, you're not going to need to worry about some sort of double big tactic to whatever, to who even is the Raptors starting Pirtle.
Cat will drop 60 on Podol again.
Yeah. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I think this matters. I think this matters when we talk about what my biggest concern is with this Timberwolves team, big picture, is how they function in a playoff environment. I think we're asking different questions of how do you make this team work in the regular season versus the playoffs. And this is a pretty important element of figuring out this team postseason wise, is if they grab the Nuggets again, in the first round, or even just a night when they're playing Joel Embiid or Jonas Valanciunas or Yusuf Nurkic or whatever. Do you think this is like the base defense? Is you put Cat on the big and you have Rudy lurk? Was that a Jokic specific thing, or is that maybe the best defensive alignment for this team when you're playing a real big-bodied scoring center?
Yeah, I think there's 2 ways to look at it. I think there's the positive and there's the negative. I think the positive thing is that what we saw early in the season, this was even before Cat got hurt. So when Karl was, with respect to Karl, was still coming off of an illness, and I'm not going to sit here and say it was 100% or less, whatever he was. He really struggled in that chaser role where he had to chase around. I remember, I think it was at the time Cam Johnson on the Suns in one of those early games, and they just ran a ton of threes, and everybody was like, "Whoa, how did the Timberwolves not see this coming? This isn't going to work." And I think limiting Karl chasing is the best option. So Karl guarding Aaron Gordon is not really a chaser role. It's kind of this in between. So for that particular series,
it's the opposite. It's don't guard the 3-point line.
Yeah, and so the Nuggets series, I guess, was a better which way do you want to go, because there's good arguments for both of it. My biggest thing is limit Karl chasing as best you can. Is just like my general thought on how they should approach the base defense. And this is a good way of doing it, because I think with Karl, you do worry about him getting in foul trouble, right? Um, but again, like I think if you're Karl and you just say, "Hey, man, you do the best you can. Just keep your hands to yourself. Show your hands." And you have Rudy Gobert and Jaden McDaniels, who objectively are two of the best defensive playmakers at the rim in the entire league.
Mm.
And I think Karl did a really good job of being physical with Jokic, but not fouling. I also thought that another technical of this was Karl did a really good job in the second half of showing and hedging hard on some of um, the ball screens involving Murray, which bought Nikhil enough time to get back to
Sure.
Murray so that Murray wouldn't just be walking into a three, because that's the other element of
I
guarding
mean
Jokic
that's
is yeah,
Cat's best pick and roll coverage, right? Like even
yeah,
outside of his manage, he likes to get up. He's better at that than
yeah.
dropping.
And Karl did a really good job of mixing up, how he defended ball screens, whether he,
Hmm.
stayed with Jokic or hedged out. And I thought it was one of the better, probably the best defensive game of Karl's NBA career, considering the stakes and what he did. I mean, Jokic shot 8 for 29 in that game, which I remember at the time going back and looking up the last time Jokic shot, I think whatever 8 of 29 is here, it's 27.5%. The last time he did that, I
Not
think,
good.
was 3.5 years ago.
Jeez.
Um, and Jokic, if you look at his game logs, it's just like everything above 50%. And the biggest downfall of this, and we saw this a little bit, um, especially in the last 4 or 5 minutes of this game, is that after Jokic would shoot over Cat, Karl would be out of rebounding position. And it would be Jokic just
Mm.
crashing into Gobert to get offensive rebounds. And Rudy just wasn't able to clean the glass. There were a couple of times where he got shoved out of the way by Aaron Gordon. He got shoved out of the way by Jokic. And there were, I think, 3 offensive rebounds that resulted in 8 points for the Nuggets just in the fourth quarter alone, coming off of Jokic shots with Cat guarding Jokic. And so I think it's how much do you trust Gobert to clean the glass behind Karl? Because I
Hmm.
think you kind of got to understand that Karl's not really going to be in great rebounding position. I don't know if you've got a clip here that
I
shows
do.
that,
I
but
just it's kind of about what we were talking about. I think this, I didn't realize this at the time, but I think this is the play where they lost the game. Now this played out here for you. So Karl's picked up his. So Karl only had 2 fouls in the first 3 quarters, and then in the fourth quarter ends up picking up 4 and fouling out. But at this point here, we have like a minute left in the game. Karl has 5 fouls, and he's like, no, Rudy, you guard Jokic. So you switch it here, and so now Rudy is just guarding Jokic after he hasn't been doing that. And then watch this right here with Rudy. He just goes into float right here in the middle. If he's just over at Jokic right here, I think this goes completely differently. Jokic has a step on him. He misses it on the drive, but he puts it back in, and that puts Denver up 106-104 with 52 seconds left. The next time down is where like Jokic pushes Rudy, and there's all that. But man, I'm telling you, I think if Rudy just doesn't fall into what he'd been asked to do the whole game, which is just kind of patrol the paint because he's guarding Gordon, I think this just goes differently.
would have you preferred Karl stayed on Jokic there, or do you
Well,
understand,
I'm
given how well
assuming,
Karl was playing offensively, like
yeah,
where do you fall on that?
so he's picked up like 3 fouls in the last like
And
4 minutes right
and
before
it
this.
should be noted here too, like Jokic was foul hunting. Like Jokic got overly physical with
Yeah.
Karl, and like I
Mhm.
look, I know you're not a big officials guy, but like objectively, Jokic is able to be way more physical with guys as an offensive player than most dudes in the league. Like him
Mhm.
and Embiid just get so physical, and they're so good at drawing contact that becomes fouls. Um,
I think particularly in Denver for him too. Like
yeah, I mean,
he
I look,
I
I'm
know
that's
that's a
not the
weird,
reason
yeah.
why the Timberwolves lost the game. I'm just saying, like
I was just
Jokic
wanting to
kept
point out
going.
that play. Yeah.
Yeah, like Jokic kept going at Karl and doing it physically, and it's
Mhm.
like, okay, I got the foul call the first time. I'm gonna do it a second time. See if
Yep.
they call the foul. He got it the second time. I'm gonna see if I can do it a third time.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I just think the biggest thing for the Timberwolves, no matter what they do, how they position Rudy or Karl, is they've got to get rebounding from the guards,
Yeah.
and that um, and that whichever big is in that roam, not guarding the 5, has to rebound.
Mm-hmm.
And, we saw that this construct, the Timberwolves just didn't rebound well enough down the stretch of this game. And I think in the moment, I was pretty hard on Rudy Gobert for not rebounding. I think Rudy had like 15 rebounds in this game. So you can look and be like, well, he did rebound. Yeah, but like Rudy Gobert's best marketable skills are rim protection and rebounding. And he didn't do enough of either down the stretch of the game. And that was a big reason why the Timberwolves lost.
Mm-hmm.
And he did it very well for most of the game.
And most of the season.
But yeah, for
Mm-hmm.
sure. And like, again, I think that if the Timberwolves roll out this construct when those two are on the floor together, I think that's their best chance at
No, I like this. It's like having the second big always be in rebounding position. So they should never be in the chase, right? That's the thing is Cat, that's part of never chasing, because if Cat's chasing the Cam Johnson, then he's not in rebounding position. He's just as screwed as Jaden is out at the point of attack, right? So I thought that was a really important thing. With Mike would kind of start guarding those chase guys, and Cat would guard the lead. Like if Rudy was on the center, Cat would kind of be more lurking and be by the basket. I think it's about one of the two cleaning up for the other, right? And if Rudy's in a rim protection situation with Cat behind him, he should have more confidence this season. With Cat's rebounding behind him, he should have more confidence this season to be able to go up and get a couple more shots or contest them more heavily. I think Rudy, everybody points to his shot block numbers being so much lower than Utah as to be an indicator of like diminishing physical capability, which maybe there's part of that. I don't know. He's in his 30s. I think, having watched this team the whole season, I think the biggest part of his block numbers going down was not having confidence in what was behind him, right? If he goes up, is somebody else going to, shore up the lob pass or the drop off pass or the rebound behind him? And having Cat be behind him, and Cat, I don't think Cat's like an elite, like outside of his zone rebounder, but he's going to clean up what's around him. I mean, he's been a double-digit rebound guy a
Karl
ton in
is
his
certainly
career.
an above average rebounder on
Mm-hmm.
the defensive end.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
That's what I'm like.
It was good in this game,
And
too. That stood out. I wrote that down.
yeah, I mean, there were some really athletic rebounds that he made in traffic. And I think the other thing too, like I don't buy into the Rudy block numbers quite as much because like in Utah, think about who the perimeter defenders were. Mike Conley and Donovan Mitchell, like guys that are not exactly known for their defense. And so he just had so many more guys coming at him, and I think had more opportunities to block shots. But again, I think that again goes into your whole thing with Nikhil is
Yeah.
if you can get Nikhil at the point of attack more and you tell Rudy Gobert, hey man, just go balls to the wall, be a playmaker. You got Jaden McDaniels behind you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a trio
The
that
more
you try
faith,
to
man, the more faith Rudy has in what is around him, and once it's more consistent what is around him, I think those numbers go back up. The team
and that's
rebounding and his block numbers. Yeah.
And that's another thing with this game as well is, there have been times I think that everybody, ourselves included, have been pretty critical of Chris Finch. And again, I think if you're looking back at this game and you're thinking, what could have Rudy done or X player, Y player done? This team, the three bench players were Taurean Prince, Jalen Noel, and Austin Rivers. And there were so many moments. And then late in the game, like, even though you think about Mike Conley, Nikhil, Ant, Karl, and Rudy, that's just not a five-man lineup combination that played very much before this series. And one thing I had written down in my notes was just the Nuggets knew exactly what they were doing on offense. And the Timberwolves were not as connected defensively. And their offense was just kind of like, like we were talking about, where you let the clock bleed into 11, 12 seconds before you start doing anything. Whereas the Nuggets, like, they're making really quick decisions. They're going, their guys, even if it was, ill-advised stuff, it was just confident.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas some of the Wolves stuff was just like, I don't really know what we're doing. And I think what I'm most eager to find out at Media Day this week is going to be, what do you think you have learned from being able to go back and watch the film of this team and all of its different iterations, because a lot of the team is the same for the first time and how long. And how are you going to be able to take the experience that you had, whether it's one player playing with two other guys or a 5-man unit or just everybody as a collective? Like, what did you learn most from that playoff series or last season that you think you'll be able to experiment with in training camp and be better at this season? Because I think the Timberwolves have a pretty unique depth of guys. They're going to be able to play a lot of different ways. 2 years ago, coming out of exit interviews, what did Patrick Beverley say? I think it was your question. It was, what does this team need to be able to do to take the next step? And play more multiple, I think was your question. And his one response was personnel.
Yeah.
And the Timberwolves have that personnel now. And it's just going to be really interesting to see what they take from last season and bring back to this season, and what they take from last season and really try and, get rid of. So,
and that was your Finch point, right? Like that.
Yep.
That's what we're talking about when it's a lot on Finch. It's like grabbing these different things from different segments of the regular season. What can't, like, when he goes back and watches Game 5, what does he feel like he can take from that? Games 1 through 4, like, you need to. It's important.
And I think he would probably tell you, like, I'm going to try to not watch as much of Game 5 because the team is just going to be so different. But
yeah, that is but the same 5. Well, I guess Nikhil, same 4. You're right. It was pretty broken up. But it's finding little shreds of it, right?
Yeah, and I think, one example of that, when, it reminded me of when you said the 4, is in that fourth quarter, you saw the offense kind of split into these two factions. It was Mike and Rudy.
Yeah.
So Mike was really helping get Rudy going. And then when Karl was at his best, it was when he was in that little kind of 2-man game with Ant.
Yep.
And again, that's just going to be, we talked about it a lot last offseason, but this offseason, I think, is an even more intriguing conversation because you have Mike Conley and not D'Angelo Russell. And that's not a slight against D'Lo. This is just saying it's Mike different. Played with Rudy for, what was it, 3 years?
Yeah,
2-3 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, I'm just excited to, again, see Finch. I think really smart minds. Like, I'm really excited to see, like, what Zach Lowe has to say, breaking this thing down, because I think one way or the other, like, Finch is just going to be in a position where he's going to get a lot of credit or a lot of blame depending on which way this thing goes. But I think if you're a coach, like, that's a really exciting proposition.
It's an exciting proposition if there are answers to be found. And some people, depending on your skepticism, don't believe there are answers to be found, right? I think Chris Finch believes there are answers to be found. They just need to find them and execute on what they are. I think, Jack, for me, it was helpful, just like in advance of Media Day, even if we weren't going to do an episode. I think this was good to just get my head kind of back into what this team, specifically with the top 3, looks like, how they get going together, because that was a time that they did. I think it's a little overrated if we're saying that was an awesome team in Game 5 and, like, look out, they're now just ready to roll and go through everything. But they were good. If we're talking about the different places that Finch can grab things from, he might be able to grab a couple from this game, and I don't know about other iterations of the season, how much he can take from it.
Yeah, the biggest thing that I wanted to get in.
All right, you waited to the 70-minute mark, but this is good.
The backup point guard rotation from this game. Jalen Noel played 8 minutes, 4 of them that in my notes I had as a backup point guard. Na played 2 minutes as a backup point guard. So there were, that's kind of how it shook out. Like, Anthony Edwards played, a couple of minutes interspersed there when, Mike Conley was off the floor. Shake Milton, I think, is going to have a really important role as an upgrade from Jordan McLaughlin. Like, Chris Finch did not play Jordan McLaughlin.
I think the comp is Jalen Noel. I think he replaces the Jalen Noel role.
But again, he went to Jalen Noel as a backup point guard in that instance instead of McLaughlin. So I think he plays more like a Jalen Noel. But again, I think it's this Finch, and again, Nikhil Alexander-Walker played backup point guard for Canada. Like, I think it's going to be much more of a, depending on the situation, who we want to get to as the backup point guard rather than just strictly going to Jordan McLaughlin every time, is something that I think is important to keep in mind when you think about this game specifically.
Absolutely. It was relevant in this game, and it's proven to be, with the offseason, one of the most relevant things for us to be asking about and looking at for this season is, all right, yeah, we think we got Mike Conley playing 30 minutes a night in hopefully 60, 65 games. It's a lot of other point guard minutes that we learned last season is pretty critical. What that looks like. A lot of the breakdown happened because McLaughlin didn't get healthy or get in a rhythm. Jalen never really found his rhythm. This team has a handful of different options to go to at backup point guard, including maybe more of that being Ant, Kyle Anderson. Like, I'm not really worried about it. I think it's not like your classic depth chart, but I think I think they have more places to go this year that are like kind of the screwball ones, right? That I actually feel pretty confident in. They did not have that in this game, though. Jack, I appreciate you doing it. I'm sure the two of us will get on here again before the season starts. Once we, training camp starting on Thursday, we will have more and new ideas related to the Wolves based on whatever the Finch and the players tell us. So we'll be talking about it here. Jack and his team will be writing about it over at Canis Hoopus. You got anything specific you want to plug over at Canis?
Yeah. So our team, we're going to be asking questions of this Timberwolves team leading up to the season. So
cool.
There's going to be a lot of different articles here where we're answering, pressing questions coming into the Timberwolves season. So we're going to try to space those out as best we can. Those will be starting up here likely this last week of September. And then leading all the way up to the regular season. So that'll be kind of a fun thing to follow for fans that, if you have a question, feel free to shoot it at us on Twitter at Canasupus or me personally in the DMs at Jack Borman 13 on Twitter. So that'll be something that's fun, and hopefully we'll be able to hit on, Wolves fans that have questions about each individual players or how they improve certain areas that you're most interested in from last season. So I think we'll have anywhere from 10 to 15 articles on those questions, which will be fun leading into the season.
Man, I'm looking forward to it. We're spoiled with lots of writing in the Wolves market, and Canis is a staple of that. I will be back with Britt Robson tomorrow, Tuesday, to talk about the rest of his marathon interview with Chris Finch. I still need to read parts 3 and 4 that Britt got to, so I will be doing that.
He's just a machine, man.
Yeah, just a machine.
He's just. I would love to be a fly on the wall for those two. For that like, I wish there was a video element of that.
Yeah, we'll get that on YouTube. No, I mean, but in all seriousness, and Jack, I don't know if you got the chance to read it yet, but I think Game 5 was a good place to rewatch where this team was to get our heads kind of plugged back into it. But the Finch article with Britt is really valuable to know what Finch is thinking. Finch is the type of coach who really is willing and able to answer a lot of those questions in ways that I think help us answer some of those questions that you're talking about, Jack. I'm sure some of your writers will be referencing some of the things that Finch said in that. So yeah, read everything over at Canis. Check out Britt's Q&A with Finch in advance of Tuesday when Britt and I talk again. That'll be the plan, and then Media Day on Thursday. Kyle and I will get together to chop that up. We're rolling. Wolves season, I guess, is here. It came quick. Again, he's Jack. Follow him on Twitter at JRBorman13. Did I do that right?
Correct, man.
I appreciate you doing it, Jack.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Always a pleasure. Appreciate you having me.
All right. Until tomorrow with Britt, he's Jack. I'm Dane. Peace out.